Well, last year, I thought I made a huge mistake. I picked the Texas Longhorns in my preseason top 10. Now, Texas had been ranked high many years, and many times they faltered. Going back to 2016, ranked high at the start of the year, finished miserably. Ranked high at the start of the year in 2017, opened up with a loss to Maryland, lost to USC. Look at this, another poor season for Texas. So last year I put Texas in my preseason top 10. And then with horror, I watched them lose to Maryland in the opening game of the season as a huge road favorite, 34-29. The next week, they barely got by Tulsa. I was getting beat up by everybody. And you know what? I admitted I'm wrong. Guess what? You can't pick every game and every team correctly every season. I made the mistake. I fell for the trap. Yeah, I was wrong. Especially you look at the USC game. Texas was horrible. They're down 14-3 after one quarter. I've crunkled them up, thrown them in the trash. I can't believe I was such an idiot and picked Texas to be in my preseason top 10. Admitted I was wrong completely at that point. What happened? Well, as the season went along, they beat Oklahoma. Later in the season, they gave Oklahoma a good game, beat Georgia. And if we take a look at the end of the year here, we'll go to the rankings. And in 2018, final rankings, guess what? Texas finished number 9 in the country. So all that stuff at the start of the year where I said I was wrong, I'm sorry, I'm goofed up, I messed up, Texas finished in the top 10 and basically at the same spot I had them. I believe I had them ranked 9th or 10th at the start of the year. That's where they finish at the end of the year. Now let's take a look at Michigan. They've looked horrible so far. Now, the Middle Tennessee State game, I will say this, Middle Tennessee State got a couple of turnovers. They had a 42-yard touchdown drive here. Later, Middle Tennessee got this 33-yard touchdown drive, both after turnovers. And then with the score 40-14, Middle got a 59-yard TD pass to make the final score 40-21. Last year, if you look at Oklahoma, we'll go to Oklahoma here for a second. The Sooners opened up the season with Army early on. And let's go back to last year. Army took this game to overtime, as you recall. 28-21, they needed overtime to beat them. And then 2 weeks later, they lost to Texas. Well, that's it. Their season's done. They've lost to Texas. They barely got past Army. Guess what? Oklahoma made the playoff last year. Now, Michigan did not look good against Wisconsin. I had Michigan last week. They didn't look good. That was a horrific game for me to watch because they were down 35-0. Rallied to make it 35-14 at the end, but just a tough, rough, another road loss for Michigan. But looking at the rest of their schedule, they do get Iowa at home. They get Notre Dame at home. They get Michigan State at home. They get Ohio State at home. They play much better at home. They do have one tough road opponent, Penn State, Illinois, Indiana, Maryland, all very winnable road games. If they take care of business at home, somehow beat Penn State, and somehow win this one at the end of the year, chances are still there. So as much as right now I want to crinkle up Michigan, toss them in the trash, admit I was wrong, I will say this, it might just become last year's Texas and end up being better than everybody thinks they are right now. Hasn't looked like it. And this week, Shea Patterson's questionable. Dylan McCaffrey's out against Rutgers. You wonder what was going to happen with a little bit of a letdown. But we'll see what happens the rest of the season and see if Michigan can turn this thing around. Well, last week I gave you a Deja Vu article, and I'm going to do the same thing again this week with the Deja Vu. And this week we're going to take a look at last week's Toledo and Colorado State game. And it's interesting because what happened at the end of the first half is the exact same thing that happened at the end of the game. And in both instances, Colorado State came up 2 yards short. Here we are, take you back to the end of the first half. Colorado State trails 14-13. They take over at their own 6, just 52 seconds left in the half. Colorado State gets to Toledo 47, but there's only 5 seconds left. Can't kick a field goal, too far out. Really only a chance is just hope you get a big play. And here, Patrick O'Brien hits Nate Craig Myers with this 45-yard pass, but brought down at the Toledo 2-yard line. It's a first down. Clock's run out. No time left. Colorado State comes up 2 yards short and trails 14-13 at the half. Now, Toledo got perhaps a game-clinching field goal. with 31 seconds left in the game to go up 41-35. Now they're up by 6. Colorado State needs a touchdown. Colorado State takes over at their own 25, works their way down the field, faces a 4th and 4 at the Toledo 29-yard line. Patrick O'Brien keeps the drive alive barely, and it's Nate Craig Myers again. This time 4 yards to the Toledo 25. There is time for one play left in the game. O'Brien back, throws. E.J. Scott gets 23 yards and tackled at the Toledo 2-yard line. They say that football is a game of inches. In this case for Colorado State, it was a game of 2 yards as they came up 2 yards short at the end of the first half, 2 yards short at the end of the game, and came up short on the scoreboard as Toledo held on for the road win, 41-35. Matchup for you this week, and one of my favorite Sports Illustrated covers of all time highlights it, but in a different way. Way back in 1971, Oklahoma had one of the most explosive offenses in the country, with Greg Pruitt as their running back. Nebraska had the best defense in the entire country, and Sports Illustrated put out the title, Irresistible Oklahoma Meets Immovable Nebraska. It was a big-time matchup, Thanksgiving Day, and the entire nation watched in a fantastic game won by Johnny Rodgers in Nebraska on a big punt return at the end of the game. A thrilling matchup. Well, this week we have a matchup that's sort of similar, but in a different way. Akron this week. Let's take a look at Akron. Akron has gone at Illinois and lost by 39, played UAB at home and lost by 11, got beat by Central Michigan 45-24, outgained by 204 yards, and lost to Troy at home last week by 28. That was minus 243 yards. This Akron team, which has played to an average game grade of just 61.3, that is number 129 in the country. Now, why do I bring that up? Who are they the big underdog against this week? Well, guess what? Akron is favored. Not only is Akron favored, they are a road favorite this week. Now you've got to be really scratching your heads. Who could Akron possibly be playing that they would be a 6-point road favorite against? Well, let's go past this immovable object versus irresistible force and take a look at UMass. This is right here a resistible force in Akron. In fact, Akron's offensive rush, 64, 34, 47, 39, they are averaging 1.6 yards per carry and a paltry 46 yards per game on the ground. That's a resistible force. But let's take a look at a movable object, and that's Massachusetts run defense. They're giving up 277 yards per game, 6.4 yards per carry. Something's got to give when these two Titans match up. Will Akron actually have a decent day running, or will UMass actually have a day where they slow down an opponent and keep them in check? That is the big question for this. It's a resistible force versus a movable object. And by the way, let's take a look at UMass's season. Remember, they jumped out to that lead over Rutgers. If you go back here and take a look, they actually led Rutgers in the opening game 21-7 at the end of the first half, then gave up the last 41 points to Rutgers and lost by 27. The next week at home, they lost to Southern Illinois by 25, got outgained by 181 yards. They got beat by Charlotte by 35 on the road, and last week that powerhouse Coastal Carolina came in and beat them by 34 in their home stadium. Their average game grades 56, 45, 54, and 46. That's just an average of 50.7 for the average game grade, which is number 130. And that's why this number 129 team is actually favored by 6 points over UMass. And you got to wonder what the home field edge is really going to amount to for UMass. It is a long trip for Akron, but can the fans really be that enthusiastic coming into the game? So this is, to me, a very interesting matchup this week. Two of the weakest teams in college football, the weakest rush offense in college football against perhaps the weakest rush defense in college football. Which side will actually prevail in this one? We go with another irresistible versus immovable game, but this one's a legitimate one. Now, for the record, by the way, in that Akron game, my computer is calling for Akron to have a season best 152 yards but of rushing. And of course, that would be a season best on defense for UMass as well, allowing just 152 yards rushing. It'll be interesting to see how close they come to that 152 number. and which one exceeds it, because that might just tell us who's going to get this one. But let's take a look at a legitimate power versus power matchup here. UL Lafayette has a big offensive line, and they've got a bevy of talented backs. Trey Regis, Elijah Mitchell, Raymond Calais, TJ Williams. Look at this, 5 running backs. 5 guys have topped 100 yards rushing this year. Look what they're averaging, 7.6 yards per carry, 324 yards per game. We knew they would be one of the best running games in the country. I had them in my top 10 of the running back cores coming in, and once again, a big offensive line. Now, they have suffered a couple of losses on the offensive line. Hasn't affected them. The Mississippi State, an SEC squad, they still average 4.4, 8.8 against Liberty, 10.5, and even a good Ohio team last week, 285 yards rushing, 6.2. That would be your irresistible force here. And once again, my favorite Sports Illustrated cover, probably of all time, Irresistible Oklahoma versus Immovable Nebraska. But let's take a look at this Georgia Southern defense. LSU's got a big offensive line and a lot of 4-star running backs. Guess what? They held LSU to 122 yards rushing, 3.7 yards per carry. Maine runs the football. Well, not against Georgia Southern, 52 yards, 2.5. And the Minnesota Golden Gophers might have the largest offensive line in college football. They have a bevy of talented running backs. They've got 3 guys, I think, who have topped 800 yards rushing on a season, maybe even 4. They are just loaded at the running back category. Georgia Southern held them to 93 yards rushing, 1.9 yards per carry. This is a really good run defense here, giving up just 89 yards and 2.6 yards per carry this year. This is an elite rush attack by ULL, and that to me is the matchup of the game. Now, my computer is calling for ULL to rush for 224 yards, and we'll call that the winning number here. If Georgia Southern can hold ULL or Louisiana to under 224 yards rushing, they probably pull the home upset. But if Louisiana is able to get over 224 yards rushing, they probably get the road win here. I'm fascinated by this matchup and anxious to watch how Georgia Southern's great rush D does against this UL Lafayette outstanding rush offense. The rest of your notes for Wednesday, and let's take a look how the look-ahead letdown factors did last week. You know, Temple was in a situation last week where they were off a big upset win over Maryland at home, a ranked team. They had their head coach coming in the next week, Georgia Tech, the guy that left them, and they had to go on the road and play Buffalo. Talk about a letdown spot. It was a letdown spot. They lost to Buffalo. Well, now they should be back to their A game. They're at home against Georgia Tech. Same thing with Virginia last week. Remember Virginia I highlighted as on the Phil Steele Plus tour as being in a letdown spot off a big win against Florida State, charged the field. They've got a big game against Notre Dame on deck. Oh, by the way, it's Old Dominion. You guys know that Old Dominion led that game 17-0. Look at the half. 224-66, Old Dominion had the yardage edge. Now, Virginia did wake up in the second half, but they still got outgained for the game. But they should be back to their top-notch self this week. They have Notre Dame and then a bye. So look for a much better effort out of Virginia. And 2 teams that were in a look-ahead situation last week, Baylor and Iowa State. Iowa State handled it better. Both had their big game against each other, the Big 12 opener on deck. Iowa State routed ULM, 714 yards offense. Baylor, well, they got up 21-3. Look at this. They had a 326 95-yard edge. Rice came back and made it 21-13. But these 2 teams play each other. Something I want to share with you is strength of schedule. So big this time of year. Many teams have played a much tougher schedule. So you look at them statistically, and they might not be as good as their opponent, but you do have to factor in who they played. And I just highlight the biggest strength of schedule differences for this week. Again, I'm using Phil Steele Plus here. We're going to take a look at Georgia Southern against Louisiana. Georgia Southern has played LSU, a very good FCS team in Maine, and Minnesota. They've only played 3 teams so far, no weak teams in the bunch. Louisiana's played Mississippi State, a good team, but not LSU, Liberty, Texas Southern, and Ohio. Georgia Southern's played my number 10 schedule. Louisiana's played my number 101 schedule. Another one to look at here is Stanford and Oregon State. Stanford comes in 1-3 and really struggling. And when you look at Oregon State, they come in 1-2. Now, Oregon State lost to Oklahoma State, but also to Hawaii, and they beat Cal Poly. There's been no soft touches for Stanford. They have played Northwestern, at USC, at UCF, and home to Oregon. It's the second toughest schedule in the country. And Oregon State, meanwhile, is taking on my number 80 toughest schedule. So schedule strength definitely goes to Stanford this week over Oregon State. Another one to take a look at here. When I said Stanford was my number 2 toughest schedule, you might say, okay, well, who's number 1? That would go to Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's got the toughest schedule. How about Georgia, Purdue, and LSU? Those are their 3 opponents this year. Weakest team is a bowl team on the road in Purdue. So that's a pretty brutal schedule. 2 of the top 5 teams in the country, they have played the toughest schedule so far. A couple more to look at. Notre Dame against Virginia. That same Virginia team I said is in a better situation this week. But I do want to point out that if you're looking at these 2 teams statistically, Notre Dame, while they've played Louisville, New Mexico, they've also played Georgia on the road, which was tough. Virginia's played Florida State, Pitt, William and Mary, and Old Dominion. Notre Dame's played the number 20 schedule. Virginia has played the number 98 schedule. Now let's take a look at Cincinnati and Marshall. When you look at Cincinnati, they have played my number 9 schedule and Marshall number 100. Take a quick peek here at Cincinnati and take a quick peek at Marshall. Let's get to them. There's Marshall. All right, so Cincinnati has played UCLA, Ohio State, Miami. Marshall's played VMI, Ohio, and Boise. Tougher schedule for Cincy. And I'll just, as opposed to showing them all to you, Houston's played the number 19 schedule, North Texas number 88. Florida State has played the number 29 schedule. NC State just number 119. Take a closer look at that one. Florida State has played so far Boise, a very good Boise, ULM, Virginia, and Louisville. And meanwhile, you take a look at NC State, and they have played East Carolina, West Virginia, and Ball State. So add it all up, Florida State has played the much tougher schedule. Miami of Ohio has played the 14th toughest schedule in the country. Haven't looked good doing it either. They're taking on Buffalo this week, so statistically, a lot of red here, but they have played Iowa, Cincinnati, and Ohio State, all 3 on the road. That's pretty tough. Number 14, Buffalo just number 101. And BYU's taking on my 3rd toughest schedule, Toledo, number 96. All right, let's talk about a couple other things. Go back to that situational thing for a minute. BYU and Toledo, I want to point this out. You look at BYU, and I always look for A games versus C games. And for BYU, they have had just an amazing, they're the only team in the country who's played 4 Power 5 teams. They open up with Utah, their rival. Then they go on the road to the SEC. Then they play a Pac-12 team at home. Then they play another Pac-12 team at home. And these are 3 of the top Pac-12 teams, and Tennessee on the road. That is a brutal schedule. And BYU is probably playing their A game in each of those. Now it's a little bit of a relief this week, but they have to go on the road. How much do they have left in the tank for this game against Toledo on the road? Meanwhile, when you look at Toledo, and I pointed out a much softer schedule so far this year, Toledo opened up with Kentucky on the road. Now, they lost Gadani, their quarterback, in the 3rd quarter of that game. It was pretty close, and then they lost by 14. They beat Murray State. A little bit misleading. At the half, they were actually outgained by Murray State, 238 to 237. Led 17-0, went on to win 45-0. And last week, they weren't that impressive. They played Colorado State. Colorado State had a backup quarterback, and they won the thing 41 to 35. And as I pointed out, Colorado State got stopped at the 2-yard line twice, once at the end of the half, once at the end of the game. They're outgained. So far, looking at these 2 teams this season, BYU's played much better every single week than Toledo has. But look at the situation Toledo is. Home against BYU, only played Colorado State last week. They're in a real good situation. They had to bye Murray State and Colorado State. Meanwhile, BYU's been playing 4 Power 5 teams. It's going to be an A game for Toledo. They're going to be pumped up at home. And for BYU, it's almost a relief to be not playing a Power 5 team. Might be a C game this week. Let's take a look at some average game grades. Now, the average game grades are in the magazine. And what these take into account is the yards rushing, yards passing, defensive yards rushing, defensive passing, and the points and the opponent. Naturally, if you beat a weak opponent, like here, Toledo beat Murray State 45-0, but it graded an 89.9. Here, BYU lost to Utah at home, but it graded a 94.8 because they actually were decent in yards against Utah and played a good game. So this does take all that into account. The opponent is huge and the average game grade. Now, it has nothing to do with a power rating on the team at the start of the year. That's the beautiful thing about it. There's no preconceived notions of Toledo or of whatever team it is. It's strictly who they played and what they did against them on the year. Who's the number one team in the country right now? Well, it's a team that's really been dominating, and it's the Wisconsin Badgers. Right now, they're playing to 123.9 level. Number one in the country. So no preconceived notions about Wisconsin. No, the fact they were ranked in the 20s at the start of the year and have to work their way up. It simply says they dominate. They had a shutout. They shut out Michigan in the first half and then gave up 2 touchdowns, only at 96 yards at the half. So right now, Wisconsin's number one. But a couple other teams I want to point out that are in the top 25 in my average game grades that you might not think would be there. How about Kansas State? They've only played 3 opponents, and Nichols and Bowling Green were in there, but they've played to a consistently strong level. Look at the way they're running the ball, 5.6 yards per carry, playing to a 101.7, number 17 in the country. How about this one I wanted you to look at? Missouri. Now, Missouri lost their opening game of the season to Wyoming, but in that game, they actually had a 537, 389-yard edge. They dominated West Virginia, they dominated Southeast Missouri, and they dominated South Carolina. Here's a stat you might not realize. At the half, they had allowed 30 yards, 1 first down. Missouri had a 12-1 first down edge at the half, and it was 17-7. I think they turned the ball over at the 1, gave South Carolina a touchdown. They won the game 34-14, but only allowed 30 yards at the half. So Missouri's actually playing at the number 14 level in the country right now. How about Texas A&M? They got 2 losses already, but once again, takes into account the strength of the opponent, as well as the yardage in the games. And they played a decent game against Clemson on the road. They got a 107.8 grade, only losing to Clemson by 14. Last week against Auburn, they had a 391 to 299 yard edge, 23 to 16 first down edge. They did lose the game 28-20, but graded out pretty good in the average game grades. They're actually coming up number 13 so far this year. Keep your eyes on A&M. They might be underrated down the stretch here. And I still think they might upset one of these 3 teams, Alabama, Georgia, or LSU, by season's end. And then the other one I want you to look at is a team I've been hot on all year, and it is SMU. SMU is playing some great football. Beat Arkansas State on the road, thrashed North Texas, Texas State, and then TCU last week as well. They're playing to an average game grade of 100.5, number 21 in the country. We're the top group of 5 teams right now. Let me throw a couple out at you. SMU is one of them. And how about this clash? I'm going to go to SMU Memphis. At the start of the year, I had Memphis as the top group of 5 team. I thought they had the schedule to get there. Well, that schedule just got a lot easier because probably the toughest test I had for them was this one, at Houston. Well, De'Ara King just quit. So you got to think Memphis will be favored now at Houston as opposed to potentially being a dog in that game. Navy's not going to be easy this week, but it's at home, ULM. Temple, they'll be favored on the road most likely. That's going to be a tough out, but winnable. Tulane at Tulsa, SMU, now the Houston game winnable. I still think South Florida's a pretty fake team. And then Cincinnati at the end of the year. So Memphis still has a great shot to run the table. And for SMU, the key is going to be this game. SMU at Memphis. I think the winner of that game wins this division, has the potential to be undefeated when they play a UCF or a Cincinnati at the end of the year. And UCF's still in it. They lost last week, yes, but if they can beat Cincinnati on the road, that's going to be the big game for them. And that is next week. They play Cincinnati on the road. I think that's a big one. They do have to play Temple on the road, but if they can get past Cincinnati, they get there. If they don't get past Cincinnati, then it's Cincinnati matched up against the winner of that. But the American Conference has some teams clearly fighting for that top group of 5 spot. And the last team to point out that's fighting for a group of 5 spot is App State. And App State pulled off the big win over North Carolina last week. They were outgained, out first down, 29-16, but they won, and they were leading the majority of the game as well. So App State's a team that you look at their schedule, they'll probably be favored in everything, but at South Carolina, that's going to be their big game this year. So if you're looking for a team scheduled to be that top group of 5 team, those are your candidates. Oh, I forgot to mention Boise State out of the Mountain West, and naturally Boise's going to be favored in all their games. They just passed a big test against Air Force. They do have to play Utah State on the road. They've got BYU on the road. That one's not going to be easy, but they will likely be favored in all the rest of their games. Right now, if all those teams won out, I would say Boise gets in with the fact that they've beaten Florida State. They would have beaten BYU and Utah State on the road. They would probably be the top group of 5 team right now. if they win out the rest of their games this year. So that's a look at your group of 5 teams. And now just a couple of random notes down the stretch here that I want to point out to you. And I'm going to start out with the amazing comeback last week. You probably have heard about it, but if you didn't, it was UCLA, and they were playing Oregon. And I love these box scores. They tell you pretty much how the game is. Look at this. This thing is 4 minutes to go in the third quarter. It's 49-17. The game's over. Washington State players are probably laughing on the sideline. UCLA managed a massive comeback, put all these points together, 50 points in the final 18 minutes of the game. That's remarkable for UCLA. Now, is that a signal that their offense is ready to blossom and be that UCLA offense? Or is it a signal that, hey, UCLA had averaged 14 points per game, only had 17 points at that point, and if Washington State didn't relax, they might have finished with 17 points. We'll find out more this week when they play Arizona. And then a couple other interesting things to point out. Stanford right now, you look at their last 3 losses and you're thinking, boy, this is a terrible team. Their defense stinks. They gave up 45 to USC, 45 to UCF. But one thing I want to point out about their defense, which surprised me when I was going through the numbers, they're actually holding their opponents to 70 yards below their season average. Last week, they held Oregon 185 yards below their season average. Yes, they lost the game at home, but held Oregon to 320 yards. They gave up big points here, but those are 2 tough situations. USC and those receiving cores we saw lit up Utah last week. UCF and Bright House is very dangerous, and they stopped Northwestern. So keep an eye. This may be one of the more underrated defenses because right now, my initial blush, I was thinking Stanford has a horrible defense. This is saying they're holding their opponents to 70 yards per game below their season average, number 42 in the country. And a couple of NFL notes I want to throw out at you to wrap this whole thing up for the week. And I found both of these interesting. You go to the New England Patriots. Let's take a look at New England. And this was surprising. I was watching Inside the NFL on Showtime last night, and so they mentioned New England hasn't given up a touchdown since the AFC title game. I was like, what? The defense hasn't. And you go back to the Jets game here, and you click through, and look, the Jets got a fumble return for a touchdown off a punt, and then a 61-yard interception return. Boy, if you had the Patriots laying the points last week, that's a tough loss there. But that's how they got the back door, was the 61-yard interception return for a touchdown. But the defense did not allow a point. Previous week against Miami, did not allow a touchdown. Pittsburgh did not allow a touchdown. They played some game in February. The Super Bowl. They did not allow an offensive touchdown there either. So that's 4 straight games the defense has not allowed an offensive touchdown. And they did a decent job against Kansas City in this one. They led 14-0 at the half. They actually held the potent Chiefs to no offensive touchdowns in the first half. Did give up some in the second half, but 4 straight games, no offensive touchdowns allowed for them. And then the other one I want to point out, coming into the year, all the talk was, wow, Denver Broncos defense. Denver is going to be a sack-happy defense. They've got 2 sack monsters on the team. They had 44 sacks last year. This stat surprised me. 0 sacks. 3 games, 0 sacks by the Denver Broncos defense. Is there any reason why they'd be 0-3 this time of year? Besides the fact they did play Chicago and Green Bay, but they did also play Oakland. 0 sacks by the defense was really a surprise. Now, I'll come back every Wednesday. I'm going to give you, as I go through the games, I'll rip out all these interesting notes and give them to you. I do want to remind you, when you go to the YouTube thing, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell, give me a like. All this stuff is free each and every week, and I want to keep producing it for you for free. So just do those 3 things. Tell me what you want to see on Wednesdays. I'd be happy to bring it up for you. So go ahead and type it in below. But make sure you subscribe to this channel, and I'll be back on Friday. The Phil Steele Plus Tour had its worst week ever last week. A very poor week pick-wise. Still hitting 62% winners over the 2 years, and we will bounce back, and I might even have a little guarantee up for you on Friday. So make sure you subscribe. Make sure you check back on Friday morning for the. Hey, everyone. This is Phil Steele. If you're a hardcore football fan, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and, of course, hit the bell. And comment below your favorite football moment of the week, and let us know what you'd like to see here on my YouTube channel.